From the offices of DFID in London, I am pleased to introduce Richard Manning and to thank him for making the time available for us. Richard, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. I'm extremely honoured to be asked to speak at the start of this important day for aid data, and important day generally for the cause of aid transparency. I think that the event you've put together today is extremely opportune, coming as it does just before the high-level forum on aid effectiveness in Busan, at which accountability, transparency and results will certainly be major issues. And when one looks back on the sequence of high-level forums, it's interesting how this subject has developed. One has to say that aid transparency was pretty much absent from the Paris Declaration in 2005, but centre stage at the Accra High-Level Forum 3 years later, and even more so now. To be fair, Jim Wolfenson gave a lot of weight at the Rome High-Level Forum back in 2003, which launched this process, to what was then the brand new Development Gateway initiative. And I'm sure he would strongly appreciate the fact that his brainchild has maintained its concern for presenting the facts about aid, and now does so within the wider family created by the merger of AIDA and PLAD. And I welcome very much the representatives of the College of William and Mary and Brigham Young who are here today. Why has this subject become more significant? I think what we're seeing is a growing interest from several directions at once. Thus, recipient governments want information on what is happening in their own country, including aid that falls outside government systems. They also want much more predictability of aid, and this was a centrepiece of their position at Accra, where the issue was given much more attention, as I say, than at Paris 3 years earlier. It was crystallised to me by a presentation made by the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Finance of Rwanda when I was still at the DAC. And he was presenting the situation that he faced in being requested by donors to put together a mid-term expenditure framework in a budget which 40% of which was coming from aid donors who weren't prepared to tell him what they would be putting into his budget in the future. That's a completely absurd situation which no government should have to face, and I think that recipients are quite right, particularly those more dependent on aid, to be pressing strongly for more transparency and predictability on what they may expect. Similarly, civil society has seen the high-level forum process as a means of pressing donors to increase their transparency over what they're spending money on, what conditions are attached to it, and how communities can benefit. And indeed, the very recent African Consensus on Development Effectiveness, a document which I recommend to you all, and which has been constructed jointly by African governments and civil society as a key input to the Busan Forum, says, and I quote, "We resolve to program and manage aid more effectively to achieve development results, accountability and transparency, including through building strong institutions for accountability, oversight and implementation, and the promotion of greater participation of Parliament, civil society and private sector in defining and implementing the development agenda." I think that's a very significant statement coming from African governments and civil society together. For their part, donors have long been concerned about transparency within recipient countries, but now I think they're increasingly aware of the need to be highly transparent themselves towards their own publics. And it's been interesting to see, literally over the last 12 months, initiatives in countries as varied as Sweden, the United States and the United Kingdom in that direction. Academics also have been very limited by inadequacies in existing data sets. I always cringe slightly when I see another study which uses the ODA statistic as the basis for judgment, given that so many different things come into ODA and so much more value can be extracted by something which disaggregates more effectively. Researchers need to provide more customized data to address policy issues. It's been fascinating to watch, for example, the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation in Seattle putting out a whole new series on what it calls Development Assistance for Health, which is designed to fill in some of the gaps that are left by the official reporting systems. And finally, we'll be seeing in just a week or two the launch by the NGO Publish What You Fund of its first index of donor transparency, in which it will rate donor agencies according to their degree of aid transparency that they show. So these demands are coming together, and they put particular pressures on the suppliers of data. It's certainly true that, as I said, individual donors are putting out information, additional information, and I welcome what you say about the very important role that Shahida Badier and her colleagues have played in the Open Data Group at the World Bank. But of course, what is done by individual donors is often done in a manner that does not make aggregation and comparison entirely straightforward. Then we have, and it's a very important plank of the whole system, the creditor reporting system, and the development of what's called CRS Double Plus is a good initiative, but of course it is limited to existing information and by the pace of change and limitations of an intergovernmental system. I'm very pleased that aid data and the OECD are working together to give aid data privileged access to the full CRS data set that is indeed at the core of aid data. Also, it's very good that the OECD Development Assistance Committee has finally started producing forward-looking data on the basis of what it calls country programmable aid. I think this is a very important innovation, but it does need to become much more transparent and to move beyond aggregate figures for each recipient to detail how much each donor will provide to each recipient. And I look forward to further progress in that direction. And finally, I think we have to mention the importance of the International Aid Transparency Initiative launched at the Accra High Level Forum. This, as you know, is an innovative attempt to agree standards and to provide access to data on a consistent basis through its registry. As I see it, IATI is now beginning to acquire traction and momentum. It's extremely encouraging that organizations like the World Bank, DFID and others are now putting out information to the IATI standards. But it will take time to bring more key players on board. And a feature of IATI is that it's providing raw material, and therefore there's an increasing need for what one might call infomediaries to make effective use of the data which will become available. Now, against this background, I believe that aid data is very interestingly positioned as an independent data store linked to the creditor reporting system, but not tied by the need for intergovernmental consensus, able to access data from new sources, and I very much welcome what's being done in that direction, and with the capacity to provide fuller descriptions and new windows onto its data, thus incorporating also an intermediary function. You'll be seeing later today, for example, what can be done by geocoding, and it's worth noting that the United Nations has just sponsored the first ever high-level forum on global geospatial information management in Seoul, and I think this will lead in the direction of being able to facilitate geocoding of not only what is financed by aid, but what is done by governments, and that will fill in gaps through the present system. And finally, of course, aid data through the Development Gateway has to direct investment in country-based aid management platforms, which I think are going to be central to the effective use of better aid data. But let me mention three things that we need to watch as we move forward. First, aid is a contributor to development, which is a vast and complex process. In aid agencies and finance and planning ministries, aid is naturally central. The good management of these scarce cross-border flows is a very important activity. But at field level, aid is normally combined with other types of finance, typically government expenditure from local revenue, voluntary contributions of non-governmental organizations, inputs from beneficiaries themselves. And aid may not be the most useful window on this field-level reality. Indeed, pressure for accountability to donors can distort the picture. So aid transparency, in my view, is probably ultimately less important in most countries than is budget transparency. However, the level of aid transparency can drive or inhibit moves for more budget transparency, and there is indeed interesting research by Brigham Young on this point. There should therefore be a stronger alliance between advocates of aid transparency and initiatives like the International Budget Partnership. I'm pleased that the Development Gateway is indeed working with the IBP to ensure wider coverage of all resources devoted to economic and social development, and I understand already a few live pilots to link aid management platforms and budget systems. And I hope that the new Open Government Partnership launched by Brazil and the United States could usefully help to push this forward by getting behind initiatives around both budget and aid transparency at country level. Secondly, aid data sets are, of course, a goldmine for academic researchers, and improved data sets should improve the quality of research. But the most important test of aid data sets is whether they're valuable to participants in the recipient countries, the point to which John Louis has already alluded. So easy to access, understandable, timely and relevant data sets at country level are extremely important. And this is where intermediaries can play a key role in making the mass of data now becoming available more easily accessible and understandable and more user-friendly in format. It's of course really important that trusted intermediaries respect the original data and maintain the highest standards of presentation. In addition, there are radically new opportunities for enabling the use of mobile devices to give voice to the intended beneficiaries of aid and eventually to all citizens so they can monitor the use of all public resources. This holds out some potentially game-changing possibilities for accountability to citizens, but also raises important issues that you'll be debating later today about the reliability of crowdsourced information, rules for access and so on. And third and finally, intergovernmental concessional transfers aimed at promoting development, official aid one might say, are only a part of a much wider and developing set of cross-border transactions by the public sector, and from an ever-widening set of countries, by foundations, charities and individuals through remittances, and that's even leaving private commercial transactions out of account. Some of these transactions may be more or less amenable to the kind of focused attention that official aid is now quite rightly receiving, but certainly aid transparency needs to be complemented by transparency about as many of these cross-border flows as possible. With many very poor countries now having historically low levels of indebtedness, it is a particular priority to improve information on debt-creating flows of all kinds to poor countries, including export credits and non-concessional and semi-concessional loans from all official sources. I believe this is very important if we're to avoid recreating some of the mistakes of the past when money was lent without sufficient care and attention to countries which have very vulnerable export sectors. And I believe aid data has potential also in this wider space. So I very much welcome the launch of the updated and improved Aid Data 2.0, and I wish you well for your discussions in Washington today. Thank you.